Hey everyone, Megan from The Wandering Goose here with our next little painting tutorial. We're going to be working on this welcome hummingbird sign. Just a couple different things you're going to need is going to be some glue. I particularly like the Gorilla Super Glue, but you can use wood glue as well. Paints we're going to use today is kudzu, peony, cotton, caviar, mermaid tail, and mint julep. All of these paints are from our Dixie Belle chalk mineral paint line, which can be purchased in store. You're also going to want some painter's tape or masking tape, whichever you happen to have. You're going to cut off a piece, then you're going to roll the ends down so that they stick to the table, and then your paint or your tape will be sticky side up, making it easier to hold on to the smaller pieces. You're also going to want a pair of scissors, a sponge if you have one, a paint palette or a paper plate, a cup of water, and some paint brushes. Here I'm just taking out the leaf pieces and I'm sticking it to my tape. Then I'm going to use my sponge. I have a used sponge, so I'm going to cut the end off of my sponge and get a fresh end to it. I'm going to start with my sponge and just sponge the kudzu green right onto my leaves. As always, it is up to you, but I chose to do a second coat just to give a little bit more of a solid color to it. So I just added a quick second coat once my paint was dry to my leaves to make them a little bit more of a darker green. I'm going to put my leaves off to the side. I'm going to work on my next piece. So we're going to separate all of our pieces. And next I'm going to work on the flowers. So I'm going to get kind of an idea of where the flowers are going to be on that background piece. If you have a pencil, you can always kind of do a light tracing just to make sure you stay as close as possible to the edges of the wood, because your pencil lines will be on the inside pieces and you don't want them to show. So I just poured out a little bit of my peony pink, and I'm going to use a brush, and I'm just going to brush the paint on as close to the areas that I want them to be. And then we're going to just take our outline piece and put it over top of it a couple times to make sure that there's no naked wood still showing. As I'm lining my top piece up, you can see that I kind of went into where the leaves are going to be with the pink, but that's okay because I'm going to have a leaf piece that's going to go right over top of that. Once I'm done with my pink, I'm going to set the back piece aside, and I decided to work on the front plaque. I decided to do mine with white, so we're just going to use some of our cotton white paint with a paintbrush, and we're going to brush right over top of that big open area on this piece. You're going to want to make sure you don't get too close to the outside edges there where like the flower, the leaf, and the hummingbirds are, because that will eventually be painted black. If you do get a little bit too close, it's okay. The black will cover it, but there is going to be a very, very thin demarcation, I guess, of where those two colors are going to be. Once you start getting your white on, you can always take your welcome plaque and put it over top to make sure you're getting all of the white where it needs to be. And with most of the light colors, you may decide you want a second coat on this one. So by the time you get to the end of that, you can probably, as long as your paint is dry, you can start at the beginning and do your second coat. And once we have finished up with that part of the white, we're going to move on and we're going to do the tail pieces of our hummingbird with white. So again, getting kind of an idea of where it's going to be. And just painting a little bit of white there. And I'm just going to keep putting my piece over top to make sure I have it all covered. Next, I'll be using the lightest green that we have for this project, the mint julep green. And this is the color I'm going to use for the majority of my hummingbird. I'm going to do the head, the body, the wings, all in this color, using a paintbrush. And we're just going to paint all of the head, the wings, and the body with the mint julep color. And I apologize for this next step. I did not realize that what I'm doing is not in frame. So what I have is a sponge, and I got half of my sponge. I dipped the front half of the widest part of my sponge into the mint julep color. And then I'm going to take the back half of my sponge and dip it into the mermaid tail color. And then in between, I'm going to take an empty space on my palette or on your plate, and I'm going to dab that sponge up and down just to blend the two colors together so that I have half mint julep and half mermaid tail on my sponge with a nice little ombre in the center. Once you have the paint loaded on your sponge, I took the sponge and I was dabbing it up and down on my wings. And how far you want to go on this for your wings is as far as you prefer. I was keeping it a little bit more towards the edge, and I was making sure my mint julep side, my lightest green side of my sponge, is to the inside, and my mermaid tail side of my sponge is to the outside. So then that way, when you're dabbing straight up and down on it, the mint julep is covering over the mint julep that's already there while leaving behind just a little bit of that mermaid tail to the outside edge. You can take your mermaid tail, the darker color, a little bit further in if you wanted to. It all depends on how you want it to look. You can kind of play around with it as you're going. But just adding a little bit of shading with that mermaid tail color to the outside edge of our wings. Once you finish with your wings, I used a sponge, cut the end off of my sponge, get a fresh clean edge on it, and I am using the Caviar Black just to paint the welcome and then the outside frame piece that goes on top. You can always do your welcome a different color if you'd like, and then you could do your outside frame a different color if you wanted two different colors. Say you wanted welcome to be pink and then the frame to be green. You could always do that too. I decided to keep mine black and black though. Once I've finished with my frame and my welcome piece, I'm going to put those off to the side. I'm going to use the same black for my outline piece here. The key with this is to not go into the white as you're sponging it on, because you don't want it to go into the area where your front plaque's gonna go. You want to keep that as white as possible. So you're just gonna dab very, very carefully along the line in between the two colors, making sure you're not going too far into where that front plaque is. Once you're finished doing all of your outline, we're going to put that piece off to the side, and we're going to go back and finish off the beak of our hummingbird. I decided to do mine black. I've also seen it where they're white. I've seen where they're green, yellow. I kind of looked up like a ruby-throated hummingbird and got an idea to do mine with a little bit of black. But you can mix some black and white together if you want more of a gray. It all depends on what your personal preference is. Once I have all of my pieces painted, I'm doing a bit of a dry fit on mine just to make sure everything's painted the way I want it to be. Make sure there is no naked wood or anything like that. And from here, you can call it good. I decided after looking at it that there was just a little bit too much green, the mint green on my hummingbird for my personal preferences. So I decided to go in with a little bit of white to kind of do a little bit of shading on the belly. And if you got a quick little glimpse there, that I had another split sponge. So I had mint green on one side and the cotton white on the other side. And we're just doing just a tiny bit of shading on the belly just to break up the mint green a little bit. Again, at this point you could be done, but I decided to mix just a tiny bit of peony in with some white. And I'm going to paint that like the throat area on my hummingbird with just a little bit of pink to make it more like that ruby-throated hummingbird that we see around here. Being very careful to just kind of stay within the line that's going to be there, getting an idea where the paint needs to be, and trying not to go outside that line. Keep lining up my outline, make sure I have it all covered and filling in that space. And here I'm actually going to leave the outline on and try to just get my paintbrush in that area without getting it on the outline itself. So this is going to be a very delicate process. If you had a pencil, you could just put a line in there, kind of mark out where it's going to be, but I didn't have a pencil with me. Once you're finished with your painting and happy the way it looks, we're going to get our glue. Like I said, I use a Gorilla Super Glue. It dries fairly quickly. So we're just going to put little dots of glue on our project, mainly in that big open area right there. And we're going to glue just a little bit around the outside edge, gluing where the leaves are going to go, and just adding little dots of super glue all over our project to hold everything together. We're going to be very careful to try not to get the super glue on ourselves. Put all of our pieces together and make sure everything's lining up. And then press down just a little bit to hold it all together as needed until nothing is moving anymore. And once your pieces are glued together, you have a finished project. It's got a little hole at the top to add either some ribbon or some string to so you can hang it up. And there you go, your project is all done. Thanks so much for joining me for another tutorial. Be sure to subscribe and to find us on Facebook at thewanderinggooseofholland.com.